So I think this is for most of the docs who are at academic facilities. You need to separate yourself and your accomplishments from your job. People will say, well, I go to this prestigious institution and therefore that institution and me are intertwined. And I'm like, no, they are not. All right, everybody, what's good? It's Dr. Nee here. Listen, I have a guest from Provider Solutions and Development. Remember, we are partnering up with them because we feel like they give the best type of empowerment to you as residents and job seekers and young attendings who are looking for a new change of pace or just a new job. So I'm joined by Cindi Corson. She is a physician and provider recruiter with Provider Solutions and Development. Listen, today we're going to be talking about setting work boundaries, finding balance at your job. And this is primarily, we're going to focus on, how do you do this process? How do you set these boundaries before you even start working there? So how do you jump on this when you're looking for the job and when you're interviewing for the job and possibly when you're negotiating for the job? So Cindi Corson, welcome to Docs Outside the Box. How you doing?
Thank you. I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
So I was trying my best not to use the word quiet quitting because I know that is almost like a misnomer.
It's a buzzword.
And as a matter of fact, I think everybody who's been quiet quitting has been getting fired and they've had to change their practice styles. And because winter is coming and the job markets are kind of, kind of shrinking a little bit, I think people are kind of realizing, I may not have the room, the space to do what I was doing in the past. So basically what we find out is that quiet quitting is basically setting boundaries at work and so forth. So
yeah, I know when I read the definition of quiet quitting, I was like, isn't this just doing your job? Isn't that just
right?
Isn't that what that is?
I think what happens is with social media, and definitely, I think we're still coming off, the time of the 80s and the 90s and, the 2000s. Like we in America have a very toxic work culture compared to other countries, maybe right below Japan, right? Like where it's like work all the time and, productivity.
Sacrifice everything.
That's the most important thing. Like you said, productivity, that's the most important thing. But for us and our lifestyle and our mental well-being, that is usually not, that's on the back burner. So, and I think a lot of people are starting to realize that, hey, there's a lot more important things out there with the COVID pandemic and some other things that are going on in life. Yeah,
absolutely.
I gotta put myself important. So with that, let's jump into setting work boundaries, finding balance. And I think for the folks who are listening, like this is not just a buzzwords type of, podcast episode. This is like some tangible things that you can do. And I say, and I think it's really important that, if you're at your current job and you hear this episode, you're going to be a little bit upset. But I think for those who are looking for a job, those who are trying to figure out like how much can I really, set as a boundary or create boundaries. I think a lot of it has to do with, when you're looking for the job, the type of job that you're looking for, the questions that you're asking, the people that you want to meet with, and be really intentional about those things because in my opinion, once you sign on the dotted line, that's it. Whatever's on the contract is what's going to go. So, and I think it's going to be really hard to set work boundaries or to not check your email if, there's that type of expectation that's on there. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. Cindi, I'm going to let you talk and go from there. So when you are working with residents, when you're working with people who are looking for a position, how do you help them keep work boundaries, finding that balance? How do you keep them? Where is that play when they're looking for a job and so forth?
Yeah. I think it's really important when residents, fellows are looking for a job, the importance of self-reflection and self-awareness, I don't think can be underestimated. So I think you really need to ask yourself questions before you start the process. So I'm going to ask you these types of questions. So it's always great if you have asked yourself those things. So things like, what are your must-haves in a job? Like, what are the things you're just like, if I don't have this, that's it. Like, I'm out of here. And what are your like to haves, Because,
what if they say like salary? Yeah, I want salary. I want location. And that's pretty much it. How do you, because a lot of people are going to say that, right? Because a lot of them, they want their money.
No, absolutely.
And they want to have a great passion, great place to practice.
I've had that come up when I like I recruit in the Seattle metro area primarily, and Seattle is pretty expensive. So the expectation for people coming in is like, oh, Seattle's really expensive. I'm gonna get a great salary because the cost of living's so much higher. Um, no, sorry, that's not that's not how it works because you're kind of the give and take of living in such an amazing place like Seattle. The salary's not going to be uh, as high as it would be maybe in the Midwest because you have to have a give and take. No one's going to go there if your salary, like everyone's going to be in the Pacific Northwest if your salary is super high and you have an amazing location. So there's going to be certain things where you have to have some compromising on.
I I also think, like, for example, when I was finishing up my fellowship in Miami, I found out that the trauma surgeons were getting paid literally $100,000, maybe even more, less than if they were practicing 2 hours north of Miami.
hmm
Or obviously the difference is even more if they were in the Midwest.
hmm
So there's a huge difference. That I think there's a lot of things that make location really like front and center. Like, is
hmm
if you're willing, if you want to be in this area that's very competitive in terms of a job
hmm
market, there might be some things that you may have to give away, so to
Right.
speak. And
Yeah.
that's
And
something that
yeah, the
go
salary is not going to be unfair or not competitive, but it will reflect the region. So you just have to keep that in mind when you're looking at places around the country you want to live or be close to your family. You're like, okay, what's like a realistic expectation for those types of things?
right. And I'm not saying that salary is the most important thing, because it's not. I think when I'm looking for a job or when I'm looking for a position, salary is like number five, number six.
hmm
There's so many more other things. Like, I think for me, I've changed over the last 10 years. For me, it's always been my partners. Number one,
hmm
like,
hmm
are they going to be there for me? Because I do like shift work type surgery. With trauma surgery, it's like, okay, I do an appy and then I leave the next day. Is my partner going to be able to take care of that? And then when I'm on,
Yep.
am I willing to take care of their complications and so forth? And if it's all copacetic, then it's great. And then, like, maybe second to that is like, how do I get in and get out of a contract? Those are the things that are most important to me.
hmm
And I think with today's residents, particularly like the millennials out there, as well as the Gen Zs, I think they're a lot more. I think they're a lot more open with, like you said, what their wants are and what their like to haves are, and I think those are more related to lifestyle, which is good.
hmm
I think
hmm
my
Yeah.
generation, and obviously those who are older than me, it's like, oh, like, I want to make sure I'm busy, and I want to make sure that, do you have all the materials that I need to operate, and all these different things that are related to job, as opposed to, I need something like that's like a mix so that I
hmm
can really like shine. I think
Yeah,
that's
I
the
think
big
those
difference
things
right
are
there.
definitely important too, for people of all generations. Absolutely, they want to make sure you have what you need in the position and then the job for you to thrive. I think it is just more of an emphasis on this is one part of my life, and I have other parts of my life as well. So I think that is a shift, for sure, in kind of trying to understand the culture of a organization or of a practice before you join it, which is, part of my job in talking with you. I think asking those questions to a recruiter and to everyone that you meet along the way is really important. So I'd say ask the same question multiple times because you may
Yeah.
get you may get totally different answers. Like, or you may get, variations on a theme, let's say. So that would be the ideal, is that you ask me a question and I'm like, this is what's up with the group. And then you ask the group and they're like, this is what we need. And it hopefully matches. And then you talk to administration or an executive that you're meeting with or interviewing with, and they tell you kind of the strategy behind that, but it should be along the same theme of growth or where we want this practice to go or the needs. If it's something that I'm telling you and it's totally different than that group, and then the executive has they have a different goal in mind, like that's going
I've
to be
seen
pretty
that.
telling about where that group or organization may be not on the same page.
I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen where I get recruited for trauma. And like you said, the recruiter is saying one thing. Yeah, we have a trauma position that's going to do A, B, C, and D. And here's your expectations. You get to the job and you find out that your quote unquote partners or whoever's running the program says something that may be a little bit different. Like you may have to be on call X number of days as opposed to what you heard from your recruiter. Then when it's time to meet the administrators and people in the C-suite, they're like, well, we're not really trying to do this with trauma. We actually are trying to do this with general surgery. And you're like, wait. I came here for this reason. And that is a red flag for me. So some people may be listening like, that happens, folks. Y'all need to really pay attention. Ask questions multiple times, the same question multiple times to different people.
Yes. I always recommend that just to see, you never know. It could be the same. And you could be like, I feel weird asking the same question. They don't know that you've asked the same question to everyone. Like, don't think about that. Just think about the answer.
Here's my advice that I give to folks when they are looking and they're trying to figure out, well, I have job A, I have job B, and I have job C. Like, I give people, here's my tips. I say, listen, I think the number one thing you can do is have clear expectations. That's the number one thing. And some people will say, well, what does that mean? That just sounds like a buzzword. What I mean is you need to find out from your job, how many hours are they expecting you to work? That's it. Like, how many hours do they want you on call? How many hours does it take to be a full-time employee? How many hours does it take to be a part-time, employee? And how often are you going to be on call? Are you going to have partners? And if you have partners, are they going to be expected to take care of your patients when you're gone? If vice versa going to occur? What kind of work-life experience are you going to have with your partners, right? I think that is very, very, very important. Will you be able to rely on them? And then what I say to people after that is take all of those different things and get that in the damn contract, right? Get that put in a contract in writing. Or one thing that I learned recently is if you can't get it into a contract, because you can't get everything in a contract. There's only so much that you can actually have in legalese. But what you can do sometimes is write an email, right? Say, hey, based off of this verbal conversation that we had, I just want to summarize some of the things that we talked about. Like, you said that I'm not going to take call like blah, 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 blah amount of times. Are we in agreement with that? Like, put a question mark at the end so that they are forced to answer that. And then actually that becomes legally binding. And that is something that if there's a conflict in the future, you can always say, hey, this is what I emailed, CMO or CEO X, Y, and Z on this date. And although it doesn't appear in our contract, I got the email receipts on Gmail because, Gmail doesn't delete anything. I got the email receipts on this, and that's what it is.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I know personally for working in different organizations, the things that you can put into a contract varies based on the organization that you're a part of, based on how standard it is, how boilerplate the language is. A lot of places won't change certain things because then they'd have to change it for everyone. So I know that that's not going to be the case for a lot of things, like especially operational and clinical details of like putting the call in. So I definitely say put that in an email, put it in some sort of writing, because it probably will not show up in a contract. It may be in like an offer letter, but a lot of times those aren't legally binding. So I think gives you a leg to stand on if it is in an offer letter and not in your contract. But a lot of those things won't be in the contract. So yeah, I would make a note of that for sure.
Oh yeah. Matt, absolutely. And then the other thing I say too is, so when you are telling the folks who are looking, the docs, ask yourself these questions. The other thing I say is like, find out if your current lifestyle is stressing you out. And what I mean by that is like the way in which you're living. Like, do you have bills everywhere? Are you maxed out with bills? Do you have lifestyle creep? And as a result, you may feel like, I got like the great car, I got the Porsche, I got the great house. You go on vacations all the time, but you can't stand your partners at your current job. Or maybe there's just certain things that you want to change about your position. You're finding out that when you work, your money is just going to pay for your lifestyle. And as a result, there's there's less chances that you're willing to take at your job. There's less time or less opportunities for you to say no because you're concerned about the repercussions at your job. And what I mean by that is like the stress is actually maybe not the job. The stress is your lifestyle. And as a result, you're not willing to make a hard boundary because you're not willing to change or make the necessary changes in your lifestyle that, you know, are driving you to go to work. So for me, I say try to live below your means if you can. Try to remove some of the things that are driving you, you know, to have to go to a job that you're really unhappy with. And the other thing I say too is debt a looming figure in your life. If debt is really big in your life, then like you're going to continue to do things that you probably don't want to do. And I tell Renee, and me and Renee talk about this all the time. Like once we got the debt out of our lives, like we were able to do a lot more things with our life that, you know, we didn't think that we'd be able to do. Like Renee wanted to spend a little bit more time at home. That wasn't a stressor anymore because we had this huge, you know, almost, you know, over $500,000 of debt cleared off the books, you know. So for us now, it was just about lifestyle and we want to work, but maybe be at home. Right. And I just think people should really, really look at those things and say, hey, is the stress really coming from home or is the stress coming from work? You know, so. Yeah,
I'd say as a resident, if you could, after you're done with residency or fellowship, if you can still live at the level of a resident or fellow for a couple years, even though you're making physician dollars now, I think it will really put you ahead of the game and take away some of those stresses. Like you said, live below your means, like just get a little bit on track. I think it's really tempting to be like, here's my first job. You know, I've been in school forever for my entire life. Like I've been training and now I can actually reap the benefits of that. I think that's a real temptation to suddenly get the nice car, the nice house, the everything. But I think if you can give yourself just a little bit of a buffer, like you can really be ahead of the game there and not stress yourself out like that.
That pressure is real, too, because I know that parents may be like, well, listen, man, now that you graduated, particularly parents who are not familiar with the medical field. Like, I remember my parents, when they found out I was paying off all this debt, they were like, yo, is everything right? Like, you did all this work to become a doctor, and now you're still driving a Toyota Corolla, and you're living in in this area of the country, and you just are acting like very miserly. Like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, yo, can I show you my bills? Can I show you this? What do you think now? And they're like, oh, now we get it.
Now you're responsible all of a sudden.
Right. Right. You know, like somebody's coming to call and say, hey, we want our money. And I was like, oh, man, I gotta take care of this. And it's like you're so used to eating ramen noodles. And then all of a sudden you get an opportunity to go up to Baked Ziti or wherever it may be. It's tempting. It's tempting to get that vodka sauce, you know, but if you can just stand pat and kind of just say, listen, like this is for people who have debt. Not many people, you know, I think the statistics show like, I think 60 to 70% of med students or people graduating have debt. So the majority of folks who have some type of huge amount of debt, like I would say live within your means. Don't upgrade yet until you get that stuff clear off the books. Because I'm telling you right now, the best feeling in the world, if you have an issue at your job, or the best feeling in the world, if you're trying to find a work balance, is to be able to say, you know what? If I say no and I end up losing this job, I still know that I can go and find another job, or I can go and do something else, and I don't have this back-breaking bill that's going to come after me. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, it won't force you to make a decision that you wouldn't want to make otherwise if finances weren't the mitigating factor. So
word up. Now, the last thing that I'll say to people too is, and this is different. So I think this is for most of the docs who are at academic facilities, or for docs who are at residencies where, you know, it's a huge name, like a really established name. And I would say you need to separate yourself and your accomplishments from your job. And what I mean by that is if you're at a great residency program, or if you are, you know, at an Ivy League institution, or if you are a professor currently and you are at this great institution, like you need to separate that from your own accomplishments. And I see that all the time where people will say, well, yeah, you know, like I go to this prestigious institution and I teach these residents, and therefore that institution and me are intertwined. And I'm like, no, they are not. Like, what you do on your own, or what you do and what you have accomplished, has really no bearing on the fact that you went to this medical school or you teach at this residency. And I think as a result, I think a lot of people oftentimes find themselves unable to decide, should I leave this institution or should I go to another institution when I already have like a project that I'm working on, or if I have a side hustle that I'm working on, or any of these things, because they don't know how to separate themselves. So for me, like, if there's projects that are based off of, some type of research or anything like that, in my opinion, I think that should be done, like, that should come from your mind bank, right? Those ideas and all those different things should come from your mind bank. The funding for that should come from, your own funding. And I know that that's hard. But if there's a way that you can find funding for that without necessarily having to be so reliant on your institution to do all of the funding, I think that's another great resource to do, or another great advantage to have. So
that's another question that you can also ask, like, a new organization about, like, the research aspect, which I've had conversations with candidates about that as well. They'll mention that specifically. They want to continue this on. Are we equipped to that? Like, do we have these things that they would need? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. So I think being honest with people on the front end about your needs and the things that are important to you, such as research or being in academics, is really important.
Oh, yeah. I think it's a bigger problem than a lot of people. I think it's a silent issue that people don't want to admit. And, it's easy to take pride in you being at a certain institution, but,
Yeah. I have lost candidates that way because the current place that they were staying offered them like a grant to continue on something to keep them. And you can't compete with that because so sad. Made me so sad, but that's how it goes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think with today's, when you're considering the balance that needs to occur, like, if an institution is giving you money to do that grant, or they are, let's just say, if you're not putting up the funding, then basically you're working for them, right? And that's not your project. That's their project. And everything you create while you're at that institution is theirs for the most part. And to me, that doesn't jive. Like, I remember, like, me starting this podcast, depending on which job I was at, that job was really trying to say that this was their job or this was their podcast. I'm like, wait, what? Are you nuts? Like, I put up all the money to start this podcast and so forth, but there are some places that are like that. So you guys have to be really, really cognizant of that.
That's a question to ask when you are looking for a job about intellectual property.
Yep.
Usually there's some sort of caveat or some sort of blurb in a contract about that specifically. Sometimes we'll have a kind of a exhibit that you'd add into a contract that you can say what other, external activities you're doing. And then we're like, great. Continue to do that. That's fine. You're not competing with us. No big deal.
Well, let's jump to, like, let's say you have a candidate who's like, I like this position that you're presenting to me, and I want to go on an interview, or I want to go and see what, the boots on the ground and stuff, right? Yeah. Like, what are some things that you can do to kind of gauge the boundaries that absolutely occur for you, what you should expect when you get there? Yeah.
I think some of the questions to ask are maybe a little bit more soft questions, we'll say. So, like, for example, if you should be meeting with partners, if you have partners, or some representation of the colleagues that you'll have. I would always ask them, what do they enjoy doing outside of work? And if they don't have anything, I think that's an immediate red flag. If they're like, oh, I'm never outside of the hospital, like I never. Or, like the hesitation. You can tell when people are like
outside
they
of
don't,
the job. What are you talking about?
They don't have an outside of the job. This is the job. That would tell you maybe that's going to be your life too. Or are they happy? Like, are you guys happy working here? And if it's not an immediate yes, I mean, that could also be another kind of a, how do they react when you ask that type of a question? Just something to keep in mind. I'd say, what happens when people use vacation time? Like, is it part of the culture to use vacation time? You may get vacation time, but is it actually used, or people are like, oh, I'll just cash out my vacation time at the end of the year because I wasn't able to take it. Like
That's a low key big question right there. Yeah.
it's a huge question. Like, if will I be punished for taking vacation time? Like maybe not, don't ask that, but like essentially that's what you're trying to figure out. Is it part of that culture? Is it encouraged? I know part of what I tell about my organization is that you can only carry over this many hours to the following year of vacation time. We want you to use your vacation time. Like, that's the point of it. That's, you can't cash it out. You use it and take it. You don't want to get to the point where you're burned out. Like, that's what it's there for. Of course, there's always the question of what's the call schedule. That's a big thing. What is the expectations for call? Is it on the phone? Is it in person?
It's on Flex.
Is it? Yes. And a lot of times that, that's the kind of question that, again, I would ask multiple people to kind of narrow that down to get like, there's always one person who's just going to give it to you straight, and be like, boom, calls this. And we're so glad you're going to be coming so that you can take most of this call. Or, is it split equitably? Is the expectation that you're the new person and you have to take all the call because I put in my time, no more call for me?
So I've definitely had that happen. There was a job that I was looking at right out of fellowship where, I'm not going to name where it is, where there was like 3 surgeons who were working there already. They had in their contract specific limits as to how much call that they will take. And then also in the contract, it says if they go past this limit, they will be paid X amount of dollars, which I think is pretty standard. In my contract, did not say that. My contract just said that I would be taking call, and that's it. And you would be taking calls that is based off of what the trauma medical director would make. That was it. So I just so happened to see the contract. Somebody who was working there was able to send.
How did you know that? That's my question.
So during my interview, you know me, I know how to chat. I got the gift of gab, so I know how to chat and talk it up. So one of the partners there was like, "Hey, like I'll send you my contract so you kind of know, what to expect." And I was like, "Oh, really?" And I was like, "Okay, great." So what they didn't know this obviously, but. They didn't know this, but the hospital knew this, but they didn't know I saw it, which was basically they had changed the wording from when this guy was there to, when I'm starting. So it's basically you'll take call. And if you take more call than everybody else and you reach that limit that everybody else that is limited to, that doesn't apply to you. You just keep going. And I was like, oh, heck no, that can't happen. And that was the last job that I looked at before I decided I was going to go locums in 2012, actually. And it still happens to some people to this day, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. Gotta ask those questions for sure.
Oh, yeah.
I'd also...
Go ahead.
I would just thinking about questions to ask that are still in that kind of soft question realm is just more like, what does if someone's, usually you can have a little bit more informal conversation with partners, ask about like, oh, what is your spouse like best about like living here? Or like, do your kids enjoy their school or things like that? And I think how people answer that can tell you how much they know maybe about their family or how dialed in they are with their personal life, and be like, or are they always working? Like, do they talk about like, oh yeah, I coached my son's little league team every other, whatever. Like, do they have things outside? Are they including families, spouses, partners, like in the organization? Like, do they have get-togethers or Christmas parties or whatever that include family? Like, do they include or is it just like work? It's just like work, relationship, right. And some people don't want to blend those things. They want to keep personal life separate. But like, is that the feel? Like, what's the feel for, the other parts of your life? Are they included as well?
Yeah, another good point. And I think it's very telling, right? Because if whoever you're going to be working with is able to do those things, then it shows that in some form or fashion, the job kind of supports that type of extracurricular, outside of the job type of lifestyle. And I think that's super important. Now, I have, before we round it up or end this conversation, I want to ask you, let's talk really quickly about once you get the job and you start working there, or for people who are there right now, there's some things that like you tangibly can do to kind of set up a balance with what you can, what you will accept and what you won't accept. And I'll start it off by saying, listen, for me, the number one thing that I do is I don't check my emails after a certain date, after a certain time. And because I'm a locums, I can kind of get away with it a little bit more. But, even when I work at these facilities, they still give me like a job email address, right? And I asked them, like, if it's not anything related to patient information specifically, if it's not anything related to patient health information, just send it to my personal email. So, for example, if it has something to do with this call schedule, if it has something to do with what's going on with like, whatever it's going to do with the practice pattern, just send it to my email. If it has something to do with patient protected information, yeah, you could send it to my work email. But what I've done by that is I've limited, if you really need to get in touch with me, I know I'll check I'll check my my personal email account. And then if it's something that's related to the job, which it rarely is, I'll check my work email. And that way I've been able to be very like, I barely check. Like I go to my work email maybe once every quarter. And if you look at it, the majority of it is like, hey, this is what's on for lunch this week. It's like the cafeteria menu. Yeah. So I don't check it at all. But that's a big thing for me is I don't check emails after a certain time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. That's a hard line that you can do. And a lot of people do have like a lot of notifications on their phone. I think if that's something you have, like have it on a do not disturb for that portion of it for like, maybe you can't do it the whole time. Maybe you have to access depending on your specialty or, being on call, whatever the case may be. But like set at least this is my dinner time, family time, 2-hour block of time that I'm like dedicated to just doing this. Like don't log into Epic. Like don't finish your charting during this, like keep it an actual intentional time. I think that's super important of scheduling intentional personal time, the way that you would schedule your work time. Because like for my work calendar, I've got blocks of times. Here's my meetings. Here's whatever. And not until recently, like I put like I need to go to the gym at this time. Like this is a hard, boundary time. I need to, if I'm working, I'm going to stop working and do this, take this time for myself. Get some exercise, like
They'll test you, Cindi. They'll test you. They'll try to creep into your workout time.
I know, but then that's part of the setting boundaries is to also practice saying no. And I do think saying no is a lot easier when you have things on your calendar actually that you've set for yourself. Maybe it's just time with yourself. Maybe you don't have kids or a family or whatever the case. Like you still deserve to have personal time also. But putting things...
So that's perfect because it seems like you can say no without feeling like you're lying, right? Because a lot of times in the beginning I'll say no and I'm lying and I'm like, damn, I feel bad. I shouldn't have said no.
And I understand because I feel if I'm like, well, technically I don't have, like I could do it. Like I'm not like, nothing bad's going to happen if I miss out on my whatever time. But it is. It will be bad for your mental health and your boundaries that you're setting. So it doesn't feel like as a trauma surgeon, something bad's going to happen if you're like bailing out on your work shift. Okay. It doesn't have that same repercussions of like, oh, I'm going to miss my personal time, but it still is for your mental health, if that makes sense.
No, I agree with you.
Put it on your calendar, block it out, and then you can be like, oh, I'm sorry, I already have a commitment at that time.
And it could be shopping on Amazon. Just don't call me.
Yeah.
I'm busy.
Yeah. I'm reading a book. I'm catching up on my reading. Like I'm meeting with my grandma. It's her 80th birthday. Like, don't, just because maybe you don't fall into a similar life stage as people around you, that doesn't mean that you don't deserve to have boundaries and have that personal time as well.
Oh, that peer pressure to allow people to break those boundaries is huge, right? Because the rest of your partners or the rest of the people that you're working with may, that's just common. Like, hey, if it's, past your shift and people want to contact you, well, the other people do it. Why don't you do it? It's like, yeah, no, I don't want to do that. So like, for example, for me, like it's we have like an online call schedule. And it lists who's on call, and it lists who's on backup, and it lists. And oftentimes, what will happen to me is if I work 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., as soon as I'm signing out, like 7:15, I'm out. 7:30, I'm probably working out or eating and what have you. And invariably, every now and then, I'll have a nurse who will call and say, "Hey, I got to ask you a question." This is after 7 o'clock. "Hey, I got to ask you a question about A, B, C, and D." Before, I would always like answer it and so forth. But after a while, it's like, look. Two things I do. Either I don't answer the call, or if I answer, I'm just saying, hey, this person is on call. Please call that person. And I listen to what they're saying to make sure it's not an emergency. But, invariably, the only person who I want to hear from when I am on backup or if I leave the hospital is really the person who I signed out to. Everybody else, I don't pick up the phone. I'm done, unless it's like the ED calling, because then I know it's an emergency, or it's the operating room, and that's because I know that they probably need me to come in. So I just make a hard stop. And I agree with you, like planning something, blocking something there so that when, someone asks you to do something, you can say, no, I'm doing something already.
I got plans.
It's very important. Very important. So
yeah. Yeah.
But this is really good. I think some other things that, are really important nowadays too is, we're talking about mental health and how important it is for healthcare providers is, you may even need to find a therapist. I think that's something that's really Yeah, I agree with you. I'm just kind of teeing it up for you is maybe find a therapist who can help you, kind of sort these things out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I'm glad that therapy seems to be a lot more, I don't know, okay. Like it's like more talked about. People are like, yeah, my therapist said this. Like it's not as much of a stigma attached to it, I believe. So I think even if you don't have some traumatic event that has happened to you, like having a therapist to help teach you boundaries too, to talk through certain things that maybe you shouldn't be burdening other people with, or your friends or your spouse or whoever it may be. I think that can only, provide you that additional like mental health support, and kind of like space, a little additional space for that personal time, personal growth, as well.
So folks, listen, this is real, right? Like these are soft, like you said, these are soft tips. These are soft questions that you may not, be ready to ask, or you may not even know that you can ask. But these are things that are just as important as finding out, call schedule and salary and all of those different things that you're kind of prepped already to know. And this is sometimes something that you're going to have to go on faith and kind of just know who you are from a personality standpoint of what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And what works for you probably as a resident or maybe at your other job that you're trying to leave is not probably going to work for you in your new job. So you got to be really open and honest about these type of conversations with yourself and ask these questions. When you're interviewing, negotiate these things. That's in my opinion. I think that's the best thing you can do. Cindi, if people want to continue this type of relationship with you, how do they get in contact with you?
Yeah. I am easily accessible by email. It is cindy.corson@psdrecruit.org. So I love answering questions for people. I actually really like, especially like residents and fellows and people who haven't ever had a job before. Like I understand it's super overwhelming and a lot of the stuff you don't learn in training. And so it's awesome that you have this podcast, first of all, to like give an insight into that. But also I believe in transparency. So if you ask me a question, I'm going to be like, this is maybe an unrealistic expectation that you may have, or like maybe
I want a personal driver that's only going to bring green M&Ms at my job. That's what I want. It's a little bit unreasonable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I may have to break that down for you, but like you don't know if you don't ask, and so like just ask those questions. I would just encourage you, whether it's me or another recruiter trying to help you find a job, like be honest and ask the questions that are important to you, because having those expectations up front, like you said, having clear expectations of what you want and what you're looking for in a position, it's going to save everyone time and make sure that you find the right fit, which is the most important thing.
Boom. There it is. Cindi Corson, physician and provider recruiter with Provider Solutions and Development. Listen, guys, once again, we rock with Provider Solutions and Development because they're all about empowerment. The days are over where you feel like you're walking blindly into looking for a new job or leaving residency and you're not sure exactly how to go through this minefield. All the information is there. We will put show notes on how to contact Cindi, we will put links on how to contact Cindi in the show notes. And once again, I recommend that you guys go to the links that are in the show notes and how to connect with Provider Solutions and Development, because they have a resident lounge, a GME lounge in there where you can learn anything from how to understand RVUs to how to negotiate to, some of the questions that you may be wanting to ask during the negotiation process, as well as how to get in contact with amazing recruiters like Cindi. Is dope. I wish I had it 10 years ago and it wasn't there, but it is now for you guys. So Cindi, thanks again for coming on Docs Outside the Box. We will catch everybody on the next episode. Peace, guys.